Today's podcast is going to be very, very different because I had invited my client, Abdullah Al Juf, to come along and talk to us, who is a consultant in the Middle East. And I invited him to come along, and he actually decided to turn the tables on me at the very last minute and said, okay, I tell you what, just as something, I'm going to interview you as opposed to you interviewing me. So I was completely unprepared for it, completely taken aback by it. But I said, okay, let's do it. Let's have a bit of fun. So this is really Abdullah's interview with me of understanding about how I started out in my career, how I evolved the business, and what's really important to me. So I hope you find it interesting. I said it wasn't what I intended, it wasn't what I expected, but I also talk a lot about, developing a consultancy business, a coaching business, the things that are really important, and the client relationship. So hope you enjoyed. Love to get your feedback, but I look forward to getting some comments back from any of you. And for those of you who are either in the corporate world and staying in the corporate world, or in the corporate world of thinking of leaving or have left and start a consultancy business, I hope this gives you some tips that will help you to grow your business and to grow your leadership.
Hi, John. Thanks for being here. And I'm sure most of your audience would like to know, how did you start your journey as a coach and a consultant?
It's great. And I love the fact, Abdullah, that you turned it around on me, and we only agreed to do this literally 30 seconds before we hit the record button. So I love that. I was my background is in the corporate world. So I spent many years in the corporate world in financial services, predominantly. And I started as a salesperson. And then I became a sales manager. Then I became kind of a sales director, marketing director in a couple of different other companies. And the last proper job I had, I was a CEO of a pan-European insurance group based out of Ireland. And I really enjoyed it. I mean, corporate life was very good to me, and I hope I was good to it. But I got to the stage, if you're in that corporate world, as you well know from your background, is that it's always about getting to the next level, the next level, the next level. And eventually I got the CEO role. And I did the job for a number of years, and I said I really enjoyed it. But then I began to feel I was just starting to repeat myself. And I felt that I wasn't really growing, and I wasn't getting the same buzz. I mean, I'd got to where I got to, and it always reminds me of the great Stephen Covey quote where he said, of climbing the ladder, make sure that it's leaning against the right wall. And there was an element of that. I loved getting to become CEO. I loved getting the role. I loved the initial part. But then after a while, I began to realize, I'm not crazy about the view from here. And so I made the decision to change before I really decided what I wanted to change to. And so I spent a bit of time. I had a very good relationship with the organization, the shareholders. And I made it clear that I wanted to move on and to help in that whole kind of transition period. But when I focused on it, and over a period of time, I realized that the part of the job that I really enjoyed was I loved the whole kind of developing people, the recruitment, not necessarily the recruitment process, but getting people into the organization and developing them, coaching them. All fascinated by teams and what makes a team work, what makes a team not work, what gets in the way. And so I decided, to build a business around that. So I left corporate world. And as you well know, leaving corporate world is not the easiest thing in the world to do, because particularly at a senior level, you're well paid, you're well looked after. I had a good relationship. It was not, there wasn't anything negative in it. It was just I had decided that I wanted to do something different, and I wanted to leave the corporate world well, because I thought that the organization deserves that, certainly, and I did, thankfully. But then that kind of said, okay, I want to go out and start developing the business. So that was kind of the starting point for me. So it was then just kind of stepping out and saying, okay, this is my area. This is what I love doing. This is my expertise. I've had it from the operation organizational perspective. And I think that's always helped me going into organizations, because they know that I've done the job. They know that I've experienced corporate world, because the corporate world, as you know, Abdallah, does have its own, you know, idiosyncrasies, peculiarities, whatever way, characteristics, whatever way you want to describe it. And it's only by if you've gone through it that you do understand it. So that's a kind of a long-winded answer to your question of how I started in the business.
That's great. So many coaches and consultants are currently working in a daily job, and they have this idea of jumping off the boat, but they don't know what's the right timing and how to do it. Could you give them some tips and hints?
Yeah, well, I think the timing and the how and when to do it, that's kind of almost, that's very individual. I think there's an element of is when was the best time to plant a tree? It's kind of 20 years ago. When is the second best time? Is today, right? And I think there's an element of that. But also, I think that if you really feel that this is what you want to do, setting up a business in my business, where it is coaching individuals, coaching teams. Okay, you've got to have an expertise in coaching, but you also have to have an expertise in finding clients, right? And that is a completely different skill set. So unless you actually understand, how are you going to market yourself? How are you going to present yourself? What is it that you bring that makes you stand out, and being very clear about it? And I would certainly, if I look back when I started off, I think that I was probably a bit broad, in the sense of that my offer was not sharp, and I probably made a life. I mean, I was very fortunate I got clients early, but I certainly would say that I would have made it easier for myself if I was very, very specific. And it's counterintuitive, Abdallah, to a large extent, because when you're starting off, anybody who's upright and breathing and has a checkbook and some cash is a potential client, right? Because you need revenue. But you also begin to realize that people really need to understand, what is your area? What is your specific area of expertise where you bring value? And too often we make our proposition too broad. So then nobody really kind of gets exactly what you're good at. What is it you bring that somebody else doesn't bring? So I always think that, I learned and developed to actually make the offer very specific and very clear on what the proposition is, and how the client is going to benefit from, from that proposition. So I think that's, really important to get that part. But then you've got to figure out who's my audience. And that's where the specific area of focus is really important, because if everybody is your potential audience, then you're going to be all over the place. Your messaging is going to be vague because it's trying to fit in with everybody. So you got to take your courage in your hands and say, okay, I'm going after that particular market. That's my proposition. That is very specific to that market. And then you've got to get into sales mode. And I think for many people who come through the ranks internally and become coaches in organizations, don't necessarily understand the sales process. And that sales process is a fundamental part of the business, because unless, as we were saying earlier on, unless you sell and you generate revenue, well, then you don't have a business. Unless you're a profitable business, you don't stay. You become, part of the statistics that, the percentage of failure in the very early years. So I think you've really got to discipline yourself to understand what is the sales process for my business, and what is the business aspect of running the business, and how I evolve the business. And that's a separate skill to your coaching skills. But you've got to have both in order to succeed. And I know very many coaches who are really first-class coaches, but they can't sell their own proposition because they don't understand the sales process and don't have a sales background. Or you don't necessarily have to have a sales background, but I think understanding and implementing the sales process, that's where they fall off. So I think be clear about your proposition. What is it that you're bringing that your clients need? I mean, you've got to make sure that they actually need what you're bringing, because going in with a proposition that they kind of think, well, yeah, it'd be nice to have, but I don't really need it, is not much of a proposition. So what problem are you solving for them? What's your solution has got to be to a problem that is a burning need for them. So you've got to be clear about that. And then you've got to be very clear about the target market. Who am I after? Who are the people that my message, my proposition, what I'm offering is going to resonate with them, and then go in and do brilliant work. But you've got to get the coaching side and the consulting side and the selling part of it. And that's important.
Okay, that's great. So what were the challenges that faced you when you started to identify your niche, your audience, and the solutions that you provide?
Well, I think one of the biggest one I'd say, Abdallah, is getting out of my own way. Right. And I tell you what I mean by that, because once you decide on your niche, there's a certain element of discomfort, because you feel, well, what about all the other people that I could actually do something for, and I'm not talking to them? But the fact is, you're not going for world domination, right, or world control. It's getting out of your own way and realizing, okay, being really clear about what you do, what you don't do, and the areas in the market that you actually work best at. I mean, I know, for example, that, where I perform really is in that kind of corporate business market. I'm not in a training side, very much in, because my focus and my background is about producing results. So my focus is always about, when I'm coaching somebody, is coaching them to deliver a better result. If I'm working with a team, it's coaching the team to deliver a better result, because that's my background. I've always been measured either on, as a salesperson, on revenue, a sales director on revenue, as a CEO, it's on a P&L sheet that you're looking at. So all of it is about bottom line results. So I'm always very focused on that bottom line results, and really is making sure that everything that I'm doing is geared towards that. And I think that was kind of part of getting out of my own way, was kind of saying, okay, trust the belief that it is about really being clear and going after that, and really going after it. The second thing that I would say is at the end of the day, and it doesn't matter what business you're in, it's about relationships, right? It's all about relationships. It's all about having long-term relationships. It's about making sure that you're doing a good job, that you're giving a good return to the client, and that you're building the relationship of trust. Because the sort of work that I do, you are, the nature of it, you hear an awful lot about, the good, the bad, and the ugly that happens in any organization. And people have got to trust that you will respect that confidentiality. And they also would trust that you will do the best work for the client, and that the objective is not just about the revenue, or the revenue is important. I'm not diminishing it, because if you don't have the revenue, you don't have a business, but that your drive is to deliver the best result for the client, and to really manage that relationship in a very, very clear way. But I certainly would say that the initial challenge and the initial inclination I had was to be a bit broad-based. And then I realized that was just, too difficult. And it was too difficult for the clients to understand as well. But be really clear about where you add value, and by definition, where you don't. And I would say that any time I drifted, where people say, okay, because, for example, being a sales director of a company, someone say, well, listen, could you come in and work with the sales team? And I know how to run a sales team, but I don't necessarily know how to train a sales team. It's very different, right? And any time I drifted away from my core area, I always felt afterwards that wasn't my finest work. And so I very much kind of, stick to the knitting in that sense, and make it very, very focused, so to ensure that I am delivering, really good value in terms of getting the result for the client, but also that there's lasting value, that it still continues on beyond the time that I'm actually working with them. But I'm very fortunate, Abdallah, that I've got a lot of very long-term clients that we just come back and we just continue doing more work. So I think it is about, okay, you've got to have the expertise in the areas you're working in, but get your focus on the business generation side, because without that, you'll starve to death.
Okay, that's a great advice. So would like to know, what's your niche, and what's the process that you went through to identify your own niche?
Well, there was a little bit of trial and error. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But I mean, I was very clear that it was that the one-to-one coaching was very much around, working with senior executives. So I very much geared at senior executives in the corporate world, right? Because I identify with that. I mean, I do have some smaller organizations that I work with as well, but that's only just in terms of scale. In terms of the way they think and the way they operate will be very, very similar. So it is very much at that kind of senior executive leadership area where I really working with them to help them to be the best leader that they can be. And that very much depends on their style and their ambition and where they want to go to, but also that they're leading their team in the most effective way, that they're coaching their people, they're developing their people, and that they themselves are spending their time focused on the right things. With the team, and that has probably evolved over a period of time a bit more. I think that with the teams is really the gap that I can see, and which there's no rocket science to identifying it, but where I kind of really operate is that for many organizations, there's a big gap between the strategy and the execution. We can write a strategy, but we don't actually execute. And very interesting, I was talking to somebody the other day, we're talking about projects in the global market, and he's an expert on that space. And he quoted a figure to me, Abdallah, that was just extraordinary. He said that every year there's something in the region of $38 trillion spent on projects within organizations. Now, I'm not too sure I even know what a trillion looks like, but I know it's a lot, right? But only 35% of those succeed, right? So if you think about the waste of money, resources, and time, but money, even just take money, but also in terms of resources, which are people and time, that comes. So I really operate with teams is getting them to really figure out, to bridge that gap between developing a strategy and the execution piece of it, because that's where it falls down. It's not in the strategic development, in my experience. The biggest issue is actually in the implementation and the execution. And that's all about looking about, have we set it up right? Have we got the right people? Have we got the right stakeholders? Do we know what the key issues are? Have we got the right resources in place? Have we got the right people in place? Have they got the right amount of time in order to do that? Are we clear about what success would look like? What are actually the benefits? And and working in that space with teams to really make sure that they're doing that. So that's really how I've evolved it. That's my proposition. So if it's a business critical team or a business critical project that are looking to implement, a significant change, because it's all about change in businesses, then that's the space with the team that I would operate in. And that's kind of evolved over a period of time. But in the one-to-one coaching is really about developing and optimizing the potential of leaders.
Okay, sounds great. And as you know, there are many coaches, leadership coaches, executive coaches in the world, and they all, or not all, most of them are good coaches and they know what they're doing. How do you distinguish yourself and brand yourself differently? In other words, what do you do for self-branding?
Well, I think one thing I'd say is that as you evolve, the most powerful marketing tool are your existing clients, and being honest, Abdallah, I mean, really 100% of my business comes from referral, right? Okay. But you don't start that way, because you can't start that way. You've got to have the clients first. But I think that one of the things that I found to be probably the most valuable marketing tool and approach is that I think one, being very clear. So I mean, anybody who meets you, the first thing they're going to do is look at your website, right? I mean, to me, my website doesn't sell business. I don't deal in that sense. I don't see it, but it's a shop window. People go and they'll have a look and they'll see. And what you want people to feel when they land on the website is that, okay, yeah, this what the proposition is in the website, this actually is suiting my needs, right? So the website is very much around who you are and what you stand for, and how you position yourself, and who are the clients. So it's clear who are the clients that you're after, that you deal with, the list of clients that you're currently dealing with. But before you actually get there and you've got a list, a page with all of the logos and everything on it, you've got to have the first customer. One of the things that I found to be the most fundamental thing, and I've said this to so many different people, is to me marketing is staying front of mind, right? I can meet you today and I can have a proposition that I think is, a really good proposition and would solve some problem. But for whatever reason, it mightn't be the right time for you in your organization. Excuse me. There may be other things that you're doing. There may be other priorities you have, but it's not the right time. And so, but in 12 months' time, it'll be the right time. But will you remember me? And it's unlikely. So who's that guy who was talking to 12 months ago and talked about? I can't. Anyway, I'll go and find somebody. So to me, it's about staying front of mind. So I've used kind of technology and tools to make sure that anybody that I'm in contact with, that I'm staying in touch with them, but I'm providing value to them, right? And it's not just that I'm sending them my stuff, my content, because as you know, I've got a podcast, I write blogs, I write articles, all of that sort of stuff. And that's all fine, it gets out there. But so I don't just kind of send my own stuff, my own material, because that's a little self-serving. What I do is that I just content that I come across of other people's content, which is really valuable. I just clip it and just get a link to it, and every day I would send out between 5 and 10 pieces of information to people in my network that I think is just interesting and valuable and add value to them. And roughly my rule of thumb is that it's somewhere between 15 and 20% might be my own stuff, and 85% would be other people's stuff. And there's plenty of good stuff around it. So to me, marketing is about staying in front of mind. And that's how I do that. And I stay in touch, and and I've got better at staying in touch with people over the years. And that's my most powerful way of staying in touch. But the most powerful of all is actually just getting referrals from existing clients. But you can't start there because you don't have the clients. The first thing I would say to you, just stay in touch with your network. Be valuable, so that we see an email coming in from you, think, oh, that's going to be interesting, right? It's not just me. Can I sell you something? Can you buy from me, or will you buy from me, or here's my latest offer? I hate that, right? It's actually just be valuable, be a resource to them, and be somebody that provides good and valuable content to them on a regular basis.
Okay. So you start by educating them, keeping in touch with them, then you sell.
Yes. Yeah, okay. Because it's a relationship, Abdallah. People still buy from people they know, like, and trust. Nobody's going to go on and Google, and if they do, find my website, if they manage to find it, and say, yeah, okay, I'm gonna buy from that company, right? That's not how it works. You're bringing people into your organization to make a difference. You want to know that person can deliver, right? And the best way I find that out is to say, okay, well, I know that he's worked for somebody else in the organization or another organization, or I can see the track record that this person has, and that's how I do it. But it ends up being a relationship. They trust you, because don't forget, for them, I mean, if anybody hires you or me to go in and work with their team, they're putting us in front of their team. If it doesn't work out, yeah, okay, it's bad for us, but it's bad for them, right? It's really damaging for them, because they brought somebody in that didn't actually deliver value. So they've got to trust you, and you've got to build that trust over a period of time. And, and obviously once you've built that trust, then you just do everything in your power never to damage it.
Yeah. Okay. For marketing, in your point of view, what's the ideal relationship between a coach and social media?
Well, that's not an easy question to answer, to be honest with you, because I think that, again, I think social media, if I look at what I'm trying to do, if I look at, say, okay, I'm very clear about who are the people that I want to stay in touch with, right?
Okay.
So really clear about that. Then the question is, which social media platform are they going to be on? Now, nobody is probably in any single social media platform, but you can say, okay, for the work that I do, LinkedIn is clearly one, right? That would be. So I would predominantly lean towards social media, because again, social media is doing exactly what I was saying earlier on. It's keeping me front of mind for people who maybe don't get an email or something like that, but it's keeping me front of mind. And LinkedIn is a natural habitat for me. Do I put stuff on other social media? Yes, I do, but it's just because I've created for LinkedIn and I will share it with some other. But I don't go heavy on others and I don't really engage hugely with others. LinkedIn would be the important one. I think it is important to be seen on a platform like LinkedIn. For the business that we're in, right? For other businesses, it may be very, very, very different, because and I don't like the term thought leader because it sounds very grandiose, but people got to see that you have an opinion, you have a view, and that you have you've got a way of thinking and expressing yourself that is going to fit with the culture and values that they have in the organization. Because you bring somebody into the organization, they do have to fit into the culture and the values of that organization as well. And so that it's not kind of jarring against it. So people have got to know your voice. And I think that one of the things that you've got to find, and I think this is why, getting stuff out on social media, getting stuff out, particularly in LinkedIn in this case, people get to know your voice. People get to know, well, yeah, I know where John is coming from. I know that's how he thinks. I know that's how he is viewed. Now, you might disagree with it, but I know what makes him tick. And that to me is the value of social media. But in my case, it's primarily on LinkedIn.
Okay. Since LinkedIn is your focus right now as a coach and as a consultant, what are the different activities that you practice on LinkedIn?
Well, I would I write articles on a reasonably regular basis. Not as regular as I should, if I'm being honest, but I do write articles on a reasonably regular basis. And also I use my podcast quite extensively on LinkedIn. So all of the podcasts that I record, I would use those quite extensively on LinkedIn, and we kind of cut them up and stuff. So it's, because I've been fortunate to have some absolutely amazing guests on the podcast that deliver incredible value, right? And even though I'm promoting somebody else, but people also identify that it's coming from me, right? So I would use the podcast very, very extensively, and that would be what I would probably produce more of in terms of volume. And also, I think that the great thing about podcasts is, podcasts have a long shelf life. It's not, I always think it's fascinating when you look at your own data to see downloads, because your immediate kind of sense is that, it's going to be the most recent one would be the biggest downloads. But so you go in, you see that, a podcast that you recorded 2 years ago and you published 2 years ago has been, the biggest download that week. And it was fascinating. So they do have a great, longevity in terms of, that they still produce value and people will find them and do. So that would be a lot. So it would be the podcast articles. I do comment a bit. Again, I'd say probably not as much as I should. But that's just down to time that I just choose to spend doing other things. I'm a great believer in saying that I don't have the time for it, because the truth is we all have the time. We just choose to spend our time differently. But yeah, I mean, thankfully, with the level of work that I've got on my plate, and it does limit the time available to actually do other things. But I mean, that's really, again, it's the whole principle, Abdallah, of making sure that I'm staying front of mind of the people that I want to stay front of mind of.
Sounds great. So if a new consultant or a coach wants to go heavy on LinkedIn, what's your tip for them to start with?
Well, I think be clear. I think be clear about who you want to connect with. Who are the people that you want to connect with? Because again, LinkedIn is great because it's such a huge platform and there are so many people on it. But the downside of LinkedIn, like any social media, is that there are so many people on it, right? So it's actually who do I want to speak to, and what's my message? don't just get on and be busy putting stuff out. I think be really clear about your target market. Again, it comes back to target market and niche. I think be really clear about that. Then figure out, okay, well, where are those people hanging out on LinkedIn? And what do I want to, and then what's the content that is going to be interesting to them? And again, it's regularity. You can't kind of, you've got to be consistent. And when I say consistent, I don't mean once a year. I mean, you've got to be consistent at least once a week, if not more, ideally more, right? But you've got to stay on doing that, because if you don't, then you just get lost in it. So people have got to see that you turn up frequently. And in order to be seen, you've got to have content going out on a continuous basis. So I would say that it's very much around clarity on the target market, clarity about the messaging that you want to get, that you want to share, and then consistency in terms of at least weekly that you're producing content on the platform. And there will be many people say that I'm mad to say just weekly, that it should be far more than that. But I'd say at minimum, do it weekly.
Okay, that's a great tip. If we look at you, John, in 2010, 2020, and 2030, what's the difference in your thinking and your coaching and consulting practices?
That's a great question. I think that one of the things that you find doing this, I mean, I think it's you. I've always had an attitude and a belief that I've got to continuously learn, right? I'm not the expert. I'm not trying to be the expert. I'm not trying to be, the kind of the brightest kid in the conversation, right? I do have this belief that we've got to continuously learn and learn and learn, and we've got to make sure that we invest in ourselves and that we do that. And I think that that's really important. And that's a mindset as much as anything else. And I think what that has made, I think that has allowed me to be, a better coach than I was in 2010. More effective. I think on the business side, I've got sharper around, again, going back to some of the things about the targeting and the messaging. I've got better at doing that. But I also think I've just learned very often from my clients too, because I've learned through the experience. So I've kind of grown in that knowledge and expertise. But I've also invest in various different programs, other courses, other learnings, other studies to really develop my ability to actually work with people. I mean, I've done an awful lot of study on psychology and understanding that. I've done a lot of study on, kind of neuro-linguistic programming. I've done an awful lot on that. Done a lot of work in terms of trying to understand the brain and how that works, because, to a very large extent, if you're looking at change, if you don't change somebody on the inside, then it's not going to happen on the outside, because change happens from the inside out. And in the same way that, I've got to continuously evolve, because business is evolving, and it's evolving faster than ever. And you've got to invest the time to study that, to work with it, to understand it, and to make sure that, what you're not doing is, giving out the same stuff that you were giving out 10, 20 years ago, that you're actually, moving with and evolving with the business. And I think even, I think the last couple of years, I think COVID has demonstrated hugely to all of us how, I mean, who would have thought of all the changes that have happened? And that's because of COVID alone. And that's brought its own challenges. And you need to study it. You need to learn from it, and you need to learn from others. And I think that, I would be a voracious reader of content. And that's very much around, I mean, I'm fascinated by the subject. I love coaching. I love coaching people, I love coaching teams, but I'm fascinated about learning more about what makes people tick, how do you help people change? How do you change them? And how you work with teams. And also you've got to remember that there are different generations coming into the workforce, and you need to stay relevant, because I can't apply. I mean, when I joined the workforce, it was a long time ago now, but when I joined the workforce, I was glad to get a job, and I just kind of did what I was told, right? That's a very different world to now. So I can't apply my experience then, because it's not relevant today. But I've got to understand what's relevant today for the generation coming in. And I think that's one of the big challenges in organizations, because the people joining the organizations are being led by people who've got a very different mindset and view as to how they view the world of work. And it's very, very different. So I think you've got to really invest in yourself and invest the time to study and change yourself, because every single project, contract, initiative, whatever it is that I'm involved with a company, it's involved in some sort of change. And if I'm not changing and evolving, then I'm not going to be of any value.
That makes perfect sense. You mentioned in your answer that continuous learning is so important. You are an expert CEO, an expert consultant, and an expert coach. How do you keep learning, and what are the different methodologies that you use to continue learning?
Well, I said reading would be one. I mean, I'm a voracious reader, so I would read that. I'm also I would make sure that I'm plugged into kind of the latest thinking in terms of organizations and that. I mean, and even, kind of reading some stuff that would not necessarily be kind of directly in my own area. I mean, even just somebody recommended recently was a book to me about, digital transformation. Now, I'm not going to be an expert in digital transformation, right? Because I don't understand it. But I can, if I read and educate myself in the approach and how you would drive a digital transformation, then that really helps me to understand. So I do plug into a lot of the thinking from, some of the Harvards, the McKinseys, and people like that as to, what are the trends, what are the things, and then depending on what I see of that and how relevant they are to the market and the market that I'm operating in, I would then go and find, and whether it's do a course or do a reading or attend a series of lectures or whatever it might be, I will then do that. But I would also very intentionally set out every year that I'm going to invest a certain amount of time and money in my own development. Because, I can't preach for other people to do it and not do it myself. And I've also got to make sure that I'm staying tuned in, that I'm staying relevant to the businesses, and that relevance is really, really critically important. So I would say, yes, I would say that the work that I do now is different, not dramatically different, but I think the way I go about and how I approach it has evolved, and the thinking and the things that I'm doing now will be somewhat different. And I just think it will be the same going forward. But I love that. I enjoy that. I mean, that to me is what gives me energy. It's challenging at the same time, but it does give me energy. And I think for all of us, just as human beings, I just think that we need to have an attitude of continuous growth.
Okay. And at this level and at this age, do you have a coach or a mentor?
Oh, yes. I'm not certainly not going to be my own best coach. That's for sure and for certain, right? So yes, I would still have a coach, still work with a coach, and have done so for an awfully long time, because like anybody else, I've got to be challenged in my way of thinking. I've got to be challenged about, decisions I make. I've got to be challenged about the approach that I have. I need a sounding board to kind of say, listen, I'm thinking about this. What do you think? And it's got somebody who will challenge my thinking, because otherwise, the biggest risk is I become my own expert. And that's the kiss of death. And so I would, yes, absolutely. I would have my own coach, and and my own coach is pretty tough on me and pretty demanding, and that's what makes her a good coach.
Okay. What's your advice for beginners in the field of coaching, and what's your advice for experts in the field of coaching?
Keep learning and keep relevant and keep growing, because again, you start off that the change comes from the inside out, and if I don't keep growing, if I don't keep learning, if I don't keep stretching myself, then I'm not going to be of value to the clients. So I think that's, it really and truly is. The one mistake I see many people make is that they rely on the same old, and that makes them, very irrelevant very, very quickly. So I think you've just got to have a mindset that you have to continuously grow yourself.
Okay. What's a lesson that you learned in your career and you want to share it with your audience? A tough lesson.
I think the lesson that I would have learned is that, one of the thing, it's consistency, right? I think it's consistency and hard work, right? There are no shortcuts. Somebody said, "Oh, well, go on LinkedIn or go on Facebook or go on, and we will get you 100,000 followers and you will make $1 million in their first year." That's just absolute bullshit, right? There's no substitute for hard work. You understand the basics that you need to do every single day, and you consistently do them every single day. And some of those are very mundane and very ordinary, even like reaching out to 10 people every day, whatever it might be. They're very ordinary, very basic, very fundamental stuff, but you've got to have the discipline of doing it day in, day out. And I think if you get the discipline, you work hard, you're very clear on the direction that you're going in, I think you've got a great chance of success. I always kind of go back to, what Warren Buffett said. And I was thinking, if it's good enough for Warren Buffett, it's probably good enough for me. That, he said, in any business, I'm paraphrasing, so we get it slightly wrong, but in any business, the message was, in any business, there are 5 or 6 key things that you should have on your dashboard. And if you manage those 5 or 6 key things, and they're the right 5 or 6 things, you've got a chance, irrespective of how big or small your business, you've got a chance of it being a success. And I think that's very true. And I think that, if you know and you identify what those 5 or 6 things, you've got to just fanatically stay on top of those and work hard every day to progress those. And if you do that, I think you've got a great chance of success. Because one of the reasons that many people in the sort of work that I do in consultancy generally is that they do a little bit of kind of prospecting or marketing, and then they get some clients, and then they get into delivery, and then they come down and they fall out. So their income level goes up and down and up and down, right? What you need to, and that happens to so many. You have to be consistently prospecting, consistently doing the right things in order to make sure that you actually got continuous growth. Otherwise, you're always fighting the cycle of, I've got a good month, a poor month, a good month, a poor month, etc. And that's it. So it is about consistency and hard work and really building relationships. And if you do that, I think that you've got a very good chance of success.
Sounds great. As a coach, what was the best career advice you received, and how did it affect your life?
As a coach?
Yes.
What was the best advice? I think the best advice I got, I did some work many years ago with Michael Port in the US, right? And he really helped me to define and be very sharp. He was really big about being sharp about what your proposition is. And he had a kind of a framework of a sentence, and it's always stuck in my mind, and the framework is, I help, and the blank is the target market, to do blank is what will they get when they work with me. And I think that was great advice, because it's such a simple sentence, but by God, it's so difficult to actually write it, right? Because you've got to be really specific. And I would certainly go back and say that was, I'd always credit Michael with giving me great advice and forcing me and really challenging me through that process, because I'd come back and say, here's it. No, he's a bit vague, right? Come back, no, that's too vague. That's too broad. It's too broad. No, I don't get that. I don't understand it. And he said, if you can create that sentence and a 6-year-old can understand it, he said, then you've got it right. And I think that would be the case.
Sounds great. What's one message that you want to deliver to your audience?
I think that you've got to be passionate about what you do. It's the business that I have. I love my business. I really enjoy it. I get so much from it. I really do get so much from it, and I get back so much from the clients that I work with. But you've got to be you've got to be really passionate about it, and you really got to be energetic and passionate about it. But you've got to always be very, very clear is what value are you delivering to your client? And it's the value that you're delivering to the client in their words, not your words, but in their words, what is the value that you bring into the client? So that very simply would be my message.
Brilliant. And where do you get your passion from?
I love what I do. I'm fascinated by people. I always have been. I'm fascinated by people. I'm fascinated what makes it tick. I'm fascinated sometimes with what makes myself tick, and how. But I also fascinated about, because I just think that there's so much in all of us. There's so much potential in all of us, and the greatest joy is when you actually see, individuals and teams grow, and that's what gives you the excitement to kind of keep going and keep doing it. It's actually seeing that people really grow and develop and benefit from working with you, because my philosophy is very much based on the principle of that my work is about giving roots to grow and wings to fly, and that's something that I write that every single day, and that's very true to me, and that's very important to me. So to see clients benefiting, to see clients growing, to see them evolving, and to see them living more fulfilled lives, that's what gives me my energy.
That's awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, would like to thank John for being with us as a guest today. Where could your audience find you?
Well, they will get it, because they'll get this email and they will actually get where they're going to. But I'm found on LinkedIn. You go on my website, it's johnmurphyinternational.com, and reach out to me there. But they will be getting a copy of this interview that I said. And thank you for turning the tables on me. I appreciate it. Very unexpected, but I love the fact that you did that, Abdullah. So thank you for doing that.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.